And now, the Deeper Thinking podcast, where philosophy, psychology, and power collide.
Welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast. Not all movements are made with sound. Some begin with a silence, thick and unbroken, that presses in from all sides. In this stillness, thought gathers its strength, slowly unfolding into shapes we may not yet recognize, yet somehow know. The mind spins through spaces where the world feels both too close and too distant, each question a slight disturbance in the vastness. Philosophy does not come with simple answers. It arrives in fragments, in pauses, in the quiet decisions we make when we refuse to look away. Here there is no rush. There is only the slow burn of reflection, the hum of history folding back upon itself, revealing pieces of us we are not always ready to see. Arendt spoke of evil not as a scream, but as something quieter, something banal. That quiet persists in the air around us, waiting. Let's dive in. What if evil doesn't announce itself with terror, but arrives quietly, almost politely, as part of the routine? What if, instead of grotesque faces or horrifying deeds, it shows up at a desk in a meeting, filling out forms? Hannah Arendt saw this in the heart of the Holocaust, in the bureaucratic machinery that enabled mass murder. She found that the most monstrous acts can unfold not in the rage of ideologues, but in the thoughtless obedience of ordinary people who never question the systems they serve. In Arendt's gaze, the evil of the 20th century was not a burst of chaotic violence. It was the absence of questioning, the erasure of conscience in the face of overwhelming power. What happens when the moral compass is not lost, but simply silenced? What is left when people stop asking why and begin asking only how? These are the questions that keep her work alive, that make it necessary even now when the world seems to churn with new threats. Yet her voice also asks us to remember, thought is always the first line of defense and speech the first tool of freedom. To speak is to resist. In this new world of moral dislocation, Arendt found her answer not in any established ideology, but in the Greek concept of the public realm, a space where individuals, regardless of their backgrounds, could come together, speak, and act freely. It was not simply a place for discussion, but a realm in which power could be enacted through the visibility of one's actions and words. In the public realm, to appear was to exist politically. Arendt believed that the collapse of this space, the decline of genuine political interaction, was at the heart of modern totalitarianism. When people cease to act or speak in public, she argued, they begin to disappear, both as citizens and as individuals. Her critique of totalitarianism was not just about the rise of monstrous figures like Stalin or Hitler, but about how societies, through complex bureaucracies and ideological control, create environments in which people are stripped of their ability to act independently. The totalitarian regime is a machine that destroys the very ability to think, to act, and to speak freely. It fosters a world where individuals are reduced to mere cogs, performing tasks without reflection or moral consideration. This, for Arendt, was the true evil, not the eruption of violence, but the quiet erasure of the self. To understand this, we must turn to a more unsettling phenomenon, the trial of Adolf Eichmann. For Arendt, Eichmann was not the monster history had imagined, but a man who had been absorbed into a system that asked him to obey without question. In Eichmann, she saw not a figure of pure malice, but a perfect example of what happens when moral reflection is abandoned in favour of blind obedience. His crime was not just one of acts, but of thoughtlessness, of never questioning the system in which he operated. Arendt's famous phrase, "the banality of evil," emerges from this horrifying realization. Evil does not always look like a monster. Sometimes it is the face of someone who simply follows orders. In Eichmann's trial, Arendt saw the profound consequences of a system that strips away personal responsibility. Eichmann was not a uniquely evil man, but a product of a bureaucratic machinery that rewarded compliance over conscience. This thoughtlessness, this lack of reflection, made him dangerous. But Eichmann was not alone. The system that created him was not confined to Nazi Germany. It was a shadow that stretched across the modern world, finding new forms in new political structures. It was not just the machinery of genocide that Arendt feared, but the silence of thought in the face of dehumanizing systems. This is where Arendt's work becomes urgent. For her, the political challenge is not merely the removal of tyranny, but the preservation of a world where the individual can think, act, and speak freely. In a world where systems of power become more complex and more distant from the individual, the danger is not just that people will lose their freedoms, but that they will lose their ability to even recognize what they've lost. Thoughtlessness, the refusal to engage with the world critically, is the true path to tyranny. And yet, Arendt's work offers not just a warning, but a way forward. The key to resistance, she argued, lies in the ability to think for oneself, to question the world, and to speak against the grain of conformity. For Arendt, the political life is not a life of mere submission or passive existence. It is a life in which individuals act as free beings able to shape their world through thought and speech. The disappearance of this freedom, the loss of the ability to think and act for oneself, marks the beginning of totalitarianism's grip. As we confront the systems around us today, Arendt's warning feels more urgent than ever. The structures of power are more invisible, more complex, and more insidious than in her time. Bureaucracies no longer just govern, they weave themselves into the fabric of our daily lives, shaping our actions, our choices, our very perceptions of reality. Technology, too, has become a new form of control, with algorithms and data shaping the ways we think and interact with the world. The silence of thoughtlessness is now amplified by the digital machines we have created, machines that process our lives with frightening precision, but leave us disconnected from the deeper questions of who we are and what we are doing. And yet, Arendt's vision is not one of hopelessness. Her work is a call to action, not in the sense of violent rebellion, but in the quieter, more profound work of reclaiming our power as individuals. To resist is not to fight with weapons, but to use the power of thought and speech to break the silence that allows tyranny to flourish. In this act of speaking, in the decision to think critically about the world, we begin to take back the political life that totalitarian systems seek to erase. Arendt's idea of the public realm, the space where we come together to act and speak, is not just a theoretical concept. It is a call to create and preserve those spaces in our own lives, to fight for the freedom to speak our truths and to act upon them. In a world increasingly governed by impersonal systems, the act of appearance, the simple, radical act of showing up, speaking out, and engaging with the world is a revolutionary act in itself. This is the heart of Arendt's political philosophy, and it is the call to reclaim our collective moral agency. The task ahead is not easy. To reclaim the public realm, to reinvigorate our political lives with genuine speech and action, requires more than just critique. It demands a shift in how we engage with the world, how we refuse to be passive participants in the systems that govern us. Arendt's work insists that we must not only resist the erosion of our freedoms, but also embrace the responsibility that comes with living in a world that is ours to shape. It asks us to question the structures that have come to define our lives, to confront the banality of evil wherever it hides, and to resist the creeping numbness that comes with blind obedience. At the heart of Arendt's philosophy lies the belief that true political freedom is found in our ability to appear in the world, to speak out, and to act without fear. The space of politics is not a place of quiet submission, but a stage for the expression of human dignity and moral will. But this requires more than intellectual understanding. It demands a constant vigilance, a refusal to be complicit in systems that strip us of our humanity. For Arendt, the very act of engaging politically is an assertion of our humanity. In a world where bureaucracy and indifference threaten to silence us, it is in the act of speaking, of questioning, of resisting, that we declare ourselves free. And it is in that freedom, the freedom to think, to speak, and to act, that we find the power to reclaim the moral core of our politics. Arendt's insistence on thought and speech as the pillars of freedom challenges us to reimagine what it means to be politically engaged. It is not enough to simply vote or follow laws. We must engage with the world critically, ask difficult questions, and speak our truths, even when they are uncomfortable. It is through this engagement, through the refusal to remain silent in the face of injustice, that we begin to repair the fractures in our political lives. In Arendt's view, the absence of public engagement, the refusal to speak out, is the true path to the totalitarian mind. When people stop appearing in the public realm, when they withdraw into private lives or accept what they are told without questioning, they begin to lose their moral centre. This is the danger that we face today, when the public realm is replaced by the private, when systems of control become so vast and impersonal that we no longer see ourselves as agents of change, but as passive recipients of power. The call, then, is clear. We must reclaim the spaces where thought, action and speech intersect. We must create and preserve the spaces where political life can thrive, where we are not simply defined by our roles as consumers, workers or subjects of state control, but by our ability to think freely, speak openly and act courageously. Arendt's vision is not one of despair, but of possibility. It is a vision of a world where political life is about more than just survival. It is about living in a way that affirms our shared humanity, our collective responsibility, and our capacity for moral reflection and change. Arendt's work demands that we recognize the political as not just a realm of institutions and laws, but a space where human dignity and freedom are continually negotiated. Politics, in her view, is not a static field. It is dynamic and alive, shaped by the choices we make every day, in our actions and in our silence. It is in our refusal to be swept along by the current of dehumanizing systems that we can begin to reshape the world around us. To live politically, according to Arendt, is to embrace the discomfort of constant reflection. It is to refuse the numbing ease of thoughtlessness, to question everything, from the smallest decisions to the most entrenched systems of power. It is a call to remain awake to the world, to engage with others not as faceless masses, but as unique individuals, each with the capacity to speak and act. Yet this call to action is not simply about resistance in the conventional sense. It is about the ongoing work of reinvigorating the public realm, of rebuilding the spaces where people can come together to think, speak, and act freely. Our vision was not one of a perfect world, but one in which we continue to confront and challenge the forces that attempt to silence our voices. It is in this constant struggle, this refusal to remain passive, that we affirm our political freedom and our shared humanity. And so the challenge remains: how do we resist the erosion of our freedoms without falling into cynicism? How do we remain vigilant without being overwhelmed by the scale of the systems we face? Arendt's answer, as always, is simple yet profound. By beginning again, by speaking again, by thinking again. For it is through the act of thinking, of speaking, and of acting in the public realm that we reclaim the power to shape our own destinies. In this work, we find both the danger and the hope. The heart of Arendt's philosophy lies in the belief that political life, at its core, is about the possibility of beginning again and again. Each act of speech, each critical reflection, each engagement with the world is a chance to remake ourselves and the world around us. In this way, Arendt offers us not just a theory of politics, but a way of being in the world. It is a way of resisting the forces that seek to erase our humanity, a way of affirming that we are not just products of history, but active participants in shaping it. To engage politically, then, is to understand that our actions have the power to transform, even in the smallest ways, the systems that govern us. It is to take responsibility not just for our own choices, but for the shared spaces we inhabit, the public realms where we act and speak together. These realms, Arendt insists, are the spaces where freedom is born and where the potential for moral renewal exists. But this act of engagement is not easy. It requires courage, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to the idea that freedom is not a given, but something that must be continually fought for. It requires the ability to see through the layers of bureaucracy, ideology, and power that cloud our vision, and to speak truthfully even when the consequences are unknown. It is in this relentless questioning and speaking that we reclaim our moral agency and reassert our place in the world. Arendt's philosophy is a reminder that we are not helpless in the face of oppressive systems. We have the power to disrupt them, to reclaim the public realm, and to restore the moral centre that is so often lost. But this work is ongoing, and it is never easy. The danger of thoughtlessness, of conformity, is always present. Yet in the act of speaking, of thinking, of being politically engaged, we not only resist the forces of dehumanization, we begin the long and difficult process of rebuilding the world we want to live in. Arendt's vision is a radical one. The idea that politics is not merely about governing or conforming, but about creating a space where individuals can freely express their unique selves and engage in dialogue that can change the world. Political freedom, for Arendt, isn't simply the right to vote or follow laws. It is the freedom to act in the world, to create meaning through speech and action. And this freedom, once lost, is not easily regained. In the face of bureaucratic systems and totalitarian forces, the question becomes, how do we preserve this space of freedom? How do we protect the ability to think, speak, and act in ways that affirm our humanity? Arendt's answer is clear. We must continually resist the forces that seek to silence us. We must reclaim the public realm, not as a passive audience, but as active participants in the shaping of our collective destiny. The struggle to preserve this freedom is not abstract. It is grounded in everyday acts of courage, the courage to speak truthfully in a world that encourages silence, to act in ways that challenge the status quo, and to engage with others in a way that affirms their humanity. Arendt's philosophy reminds us that even in the face of immense power and oppression, the individual still has the capacity to make a difference. Each time we speak, each time we refuse to comply with dehumanizing systems, we create the possibility for change. Ultimately, Arendt's call to action is not just about political engagement. It is about moral engagement, the commitment to act in ways that affirm both our own humanity and the humanity of others. In a world that often seeks to silence us, it is in these small, everyday acts of resistance that we find the strength to rebuild a better, more humane world. This is the challenge she sets before us: to think, to speak, to act, and to do so in ways that make us truly free. In the end, Arendt's philosophy challenges us to understand that the preservation of freedom, dignity, and moral life does not lie in grand gestures or singular heroic acts, but in the ongoing, everyday decisions we make to resist passivity, to question, to speak, and to act. It is about the willingness to confront the structures of power that seek to undermine our autonomy and to engage in the difficult, often uncomfortable work of thinking and speaking truthfully. These acts, small as they may seem, are the building blocks of a political life that refuses to be controlled, that refuses to disappear. The real danger, Arendt reminds us, is not that we will become overwhelmed by a system of power, but that we will become so accustomed to its presence that we cease to see it, cease to question it. This thoughtlessness is the ultimate threat to freedom. It is what allows systems of control to take root, what makes them appear normal, what allows evil to spread quietly, without resistance. Yet, within this very thoughtlessness lies the potential for redemption. Every moment of reflection, every voice raised in protest, every act of resistance creates the possibility for change, for the reclamation of moral and political agency. To live politically, then, is to live with a sense of responsibility, not just for ourselves, but for the world we shape through our actions and choices. It is to recognize that we are not isolated individuals, but part of a larger whole, a collective human project. And in this project, it is our responsibility to preserve the space of freedom, to protect the public realm where speech and action are not only possible, but vital. Arendt's work ultimately calls us to take seriously the political life as something more than mere survival. It is about finding meaning, dignity, and moral purpose in the act of living together. It is about rebuilding the world, not in some abstract utopian sense, but in the very real ways that we speak, act, and think with one another, creating spaces where humanity can flourish. In a world often dominated by unseen forces, corporate giants, bureaucratic structures, and global systems, the challenge of maintaining personal autonomy and moral clarity becomes even more pressing. Arendt's work reminds us that we cannot afford to retreat into apathy or resignation. The spaces, both public and private, are shaped by the choices we make each day. The act of speaking, of resisting the forces that seek to erase our voices, is the first step in rebuilding the public realm, in restoring a world where political freedom is not just a right, but a living, breathing reality. Arendt's insight is clear. Our ability to think, to speak, and to act in the world is what defines us as human beings. These capacities are not privileges, they are the very foundation of our political existence. When we abandon them, whether through fear, indifference, or conformity, we allow the systems of control to flourish unchecked. The forces that seek to reduce us to mere cogs in a machine are always present, always lurking in the background. Yet they are not all-powerful. They only succeed when we cease to recognize their presence, when we choose to be silent rather than speak, to conform rather than resist. The fight for freedom, then, is a constant one. It is not a single battle, but an ongoing struggle to protect our ability to think and act for ourselves. It requires vigilance, courage, and a willingness to engage with the world as it is, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it seems impossible. And it is in this struggle, this refusal to be silent, this commitment to thinking and speaking freely, that we find the true meaning of political life. In the end, Arendt's message is one of hope. That through our words and actions, we can reclaim the spaces of freedom, and through these spaces, rebuild a more humane and just world. Arendt's work calls us to recognize that political life is not a passive existence, nor is it confined to the realms of institutions or abstract theory. It is a dynamic process, deeply embedded in the choices we make every day to confront the forces that shape our world. Whether it is in the quiet, seemingly insignificant decisions we make in our daily interactions, or in the larger, more public acts of resistance, we are constantly engaging with the political sphere. And in doing so, we affirm our right to exist as free-thinking and acting individuals in a world that often seeks to erase or suppress such autonomy. The threat of totalitarianism, as Arendt saw it, lies not just in its visible extreme manifestations, but in the quiet, creeping nature of systems that reduce human beings to mere objects or numbers, systems that strip us of our ability to think critically and act with moral conviction. Yet Arendt's insight offers a powerful counterpoint. Our power lies not in submission to these systems, but in our ability to challenge them, to speak truthfully, and to engage with others in meaningful, reflective ways. As we navigate the complexities of our own time, facing new forms of control, surveillance, and manipulation, the challenge remains the same: to preserve the space for freedom, for action, for thought. This is the heart of Arendt's political philosophy, a commitment to the idea that the very act of appearing, speaking, and acting in the world is a form of resistance. It is through these acts that we reclaim our humanity, assert our moral agency, and create the possibility of a better, more just world. As we continue to reflect on Arendt's vision of political life, we must confront the role of bureaucracy in shaping human behaviour and eroding moral agency. In a world dominated by increasingly complex systems, the individual's relationship to these systems can easily become one of disconnection. The more impersonal and vast the systems become, the less we feel responsible for their outcomes. Bureaucracy, in Arendt's view, creates an environment in which individuals no longer feel the weight of their actions. They follow orders, fill out forms, and comply with regulations, often without understanding the moral implications of their actions. This disconnection is dangerous, for it allows the machinery of power to function without scrutiny, without challenge, and without conscience. What Arendt warns against is not the presence of bureaucratic systems themselves, but their ability to become so ingrained in our daily lives that we no longer question them. The more routine and normalized these systems become, the less we see them as tools of control. They become invisible, their consequences diffuse, their morality buried beneath layers of procedure and efficiency. This is where Arendt's concept of the banality of evil comes into focus. She does not claim that bureaucrats are inherently evil, but rather that the refusal to think critically about one's actions within these systems, combined with a lack of moral reflection, creates the conditions for evil to flourish unnoticed. In today's world, we find ourselves confronted by new forms of bureaucracy that extend far beyond the government. Digital surveillance, automated decision-making, and algorithmic governance are all forms of bureaucracy that increasingly dictate the terms of our lives. These systems operate on data, not human judgment, and their decisions are made with no regard for individual conscience or moral reasoning. We are faced with an overwhelming challenge. How can we retain our moral agency and our ability to think freely in a world that seems to operate without us at the center of it. How can we ensure that our participation in these systems doesn't erode our capacity for reflection, empathy, and resistance? Arendt's philosophy suggests that the answer lies not in rejecting these systems outright, but in maintaining our ability to think critically, speak truthfully, and act with conscience in the face of them. As we consider Arendt's warnings about the rise of bureaucratic systems and the erosion of individual moral agency, we are faced with an urgent task: to reclaim our capacity to speak and act with moral clarity in the world around us. To act politically, to engage in the public realm, is not just about participation in governmental affairs. It is about the way we interact with the systems and structures that shape our lives. The question becomes how to engage meaningfully in a world where much of our political and social life is mediated by invisible systems, whether they be the technology that governs our online presence, the algorithms that shape our decisions, or the vast corporate and governmental structures that decide the fate of nations. For Arendt, the key to resisting these systems lies in the act of speech, of appearance in the public realm. It is only by speaking out, by making our thoughts and actions visible, that we can begin to disrupt the systems that seek to silence us. The power of speech is profound because it is not just a method of communication, but a way of asserting our existence in the world. When we speak, we reveal ourselves as unique individuals capable of independent thought, free from the constraints of bureaucratic or totalitarian forces. In this way, Arendt's concept of the public realm is not just a theoretical construct, but a call to action. To speak is to be human. To speak is to resist. The challenge in today's world, however, is that speech, the kind of political engagement Arendt describes, is increasingly difficult. In an era of instant communication and constant media saturation, the space for true, reflective speech seems to shrink. We are bombarded with information, much of it superficial, fragmented, or manipulated by powerful interests. The public realm, once a space for dialogue and debate, has been commodified and flattened into a series of sound bites and clickbait. In this environment, it becomes easy to fall into the trap of thoughtlessness, to speak without reflection, to act without considering the broader consequences of our actions. Arendt's work challenges us to resist this trend, to refuse the numbness that comes with being part of a system that no longer values our individuality. To truly act politically, to engage in the world as free and conscious beings, we must resist the impulse to conform to systems that do not reflect our values. We must reclaim the public realm as a space for genuine speech, for honest dialogue, and for the expression of our collective humanity. This is the work that lies before us, not just in the grand political arenas, but in our daily lives, in the conversations we have, and in the choices we make. By speaking, by acting, and by thinking critically, we restore our place in the world and resist the forces that seek to reduce us to mere cogs in a machine. Until next time.
This episode of the Deeper Thinking podcast was written, produced, and researched by Benjamin James. It was read by Holly, a digital narrator. For further reading, resources, and a chance to support the show, visit the episode webpage, where you'll find book recommendations, key topics to explore, and a way to buy me a coffee. And if you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review on your preferred platform